Hello and welcome. Thanks for tuning in today. You could have logged into any panel discussion in the world, but you logged into this one and we appreciate it. My name is Jason Wong. I'm a leadership coach and fractional VP of engineering, which is just a fancy way of saying consultant, and I'll be your host for today's panel. We have a wonderful discussion queued up for you all today. We will be doing a Q&A session at the end. So if you'd like to pose a question for our panelists, there should be a Slido link to the right of the video that you can use to drop your questions into, and we'll do our best to get them answered. Today's session is called Making of the Modern CTO. Although CTO is only a single job title, in reality, it feels like it could be any number of different jobs. Some CTOs are focused on organizational leadership, some stay hands on the keyboard, some are strong pitchers who secure funding, and some lead the product and commercial strategy. In all likelihood, however, even if your core focus is in one of these areas, as a CTO, you'll continually be putting on hats and doing most of the work at least some of the time. Today, we'll be talking to CTOs at companies small and large to take a look at the different paths that can lead to the role of CTO. We'll explore the different focuses that CTOs can have, talk about how to level up different skill sets and when to know to switch between them, and outline some of the similarities and differences of modern CTOs. To join us in today's conversation, I'm super excited to introduce our esteemed panelists. First up, we have Mary Williams, CTO of Helix. Mary is a geek, a manager, and a manager of geeks. She's a CTO and also runs micro consultancy Chrome Rose, helping digital technical teams be brilliant. An alumna of Procter & Gamble and the Government Digital Service, she has had a career spanning development, project, program, and product management, and more recently, engineering and operations leadership. She has led teams ranging in size from 30 to 300, mostly with folks spread across the world. She's currently the CTO of Helix, an AI-powered patient-inspired technology platform, accelerating the discovery and development of rare disease treatments at scale. And for LeadDev regulars, you'll recognize Mary as a familiar face, as she has served as chair and host of Lead Developer conferences. Next up, we have Parag Agrawal, CTO of Twitter. Parag is the technology lead responsible for Twitter's technical strategy and overseeing machine learning and AI across the consumer, revenue, and science teams. Since joining Twitter in 2011, Parag has led efforts on scaling Twitter ad systems, as well as re-accelerating user growth by improving home timeline relevance. Prior to joining Twitter, Parag did research in large-scale data management with collaborators at Microsoft Research, Yahoo Research, and ATT Labs. He holds a bachelor's degree from ITT Bombay and a PhD in computer science from Stanford. Next up, we have David Singleton. David Singleton is Stripe's Chief Technology Officer, responsible for guiding both the engineering and design teams. Since joining Stripe, David helped grow the technology org across the US and developed new engineering hubs in Singapore and Dublin, as well as their 5th all-remote engineering hub. He joined Stripe after an 11-year career at Google, where he was VP of engineering, leading product development and coordinating more than 15 different hardware partnerships. Prior to Google, David spent 3 years at Symbian, developing operating system software and leading handset development projects for Nokia and Samsung smartphones. David has a bachelor's degree in computer science from St. John's College at the University of Cambridge. In his spare time, he enjoys cooking, skiing, and tinkering with neural networks. He lives in San Francisco with his wife and 2 kids. And last but not least is Rija Javed, former CTO of Market Invoice. Rija is an accomplished technology leader who has led teams across London, Silicon Valley, and Toronto, with extensive experience across several domains, including a focus on fintech. Most recently, she has been spending time doing advisory work in different startups based in Europe, Toronto, and Africa. She was also at Market Invoice as their CTO, heading up engineering, product, data, and design. Prior to that, she was a senior director of engineering at Wealthfront, leading their core business areas, including the company's pivot from investment management into the financial advisory space. All right, now that we've gotten through the formalities, let's get into it. I'd like to just start out by going around the horn and hearing from each of you, how did you find yourself in the CTO role? Was it the culmination of a years-long plan or something more organic? And how did you know you were ready? Mary, let's start with you.
So it was definitely not the culmination of a years-long plan. I'm one of these people, I very much admire people who have a 5-year career plan, but I've never managed to have one myself. I had been in kind of engineering leadership roles over the years, from initially leading quite, smallish teams, then all of P&G's finance systems for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and then moved into something they called like operations leader, which was running all the sites in Northern Europe. And so I'd kind of ended up with bigger and bigger teams, and then I left P&G to get back closer to the tech, and but people always remember that you've run big teams, and so kind of have ended up doing the blend. I think I only actually got the title. The first time I ever had the title of CTO was at a tiny, very, very early stage medtech startup. And then I was known externally as that in my M&S role, but not internally, because there's weird corporate stuff. So Moo was my first proper big CTO role. The first time I had applied for a role that had that as the title, if that makes sense. And I didn't think I was ready at all. And I think that's quite a common experience, or certainly a lot of the other leaders I know. Sometimes we end up trusting the mentors who are believing in us, even if we're not that sure ourselves. And so I remember at the point I took the first sort of pseudo CTO job, the first real one, Eileen Burbage is one of my mentors, and she puts up with me going across town to her every now and again and just being unsure about what direction my career should take, and kind of her going, well, of course you could do either of these, the two options that were in front of me, which were both de facto CTO roles at the time, kind of gave me confidence even when I didn't quite have it myself. So I suppose that's my key thought, is sometimes you need to trust in the people who believe in you, even if you're not completely sure yourself.
Great, thanks. David, how about you?
Well, like you said, Jason, CTO does mean different things at different companies. So for me at Stripe, I'm responsible for engineering and design. And that means those orgs as well as the work that we do. So we also have product inside our tech organization. And I'm also responsible for some of our individual products and businesses. And then I run this whole tech org alongside our chief product officer, Will, which is a lot of fun. But I guess we can kind of focus on engineering, since it's the common part of what a lot of us are doing today. I really see my day-to-day job as making sure that our engineers have a really productive environment to work in, and that the whole job family of engineering is set up for success long-term. Do we hire well? Are we helping each other develop in the craft of engineering? And alongside all of that, which I really enjoy and care about, I'm also responsible for making sure that we have the right technology roadmap in place for our infrastructure, and that enables us to build the best products for our users in the years ahead. So, I mean, that role, it's like a lot of different stuff. But I actually would say that for me, this kind of is the culmination of a years long plan. So if you'd asked me 10 years ago what my ideal job would be in 10 years time, I would have said CTO. Now, I wouldn't actually have known what a CTO did. And I would probably have imagined that it would have been at a maybe smaller or earlier stage company than Stripe is today. But the reason I would have said that is I got a lot of inspiration for this kind of work by watching Alan Eustace, who was responsible for all of engineering at Google when I joined Google back in 2006, which, by the way, was in London. I was one of the first engineers at Google in London. And it was a pretty special place back then. It was an environment where you could really thrive as an engineer. And I was always really impressed by Alan specifically, because it was really clear he was super smart. He knew the details of everything that was going on, apparently. But he was also really inquisitive, and he really transparently cared about every engineer having a good experience and that they were doing important stuff. And he was also always really approachable. I mean, I was like a junior engineer at the time, and I knew that if I walked up to him in the corridor, he would spend the time of day with me, and he would always reply to emails and so forth. And he was just super transparent and always really no bullshit. So you could ask him any question, you get a straight answer. And he was also really good at taking a step back if you ask questions like that, to explain the broader context of what he was about to explain fit into the rest of the company and why it was or wasn't important. So honestly, I was really inspired by watching him in action and thought, wow, like when I grow up, that's the kind of role that I want to do. And that's what set me into a journey into engineering management and leadership. And there were others along the way, but he really does stick out. So doing this at Stripe really is a culmination of a kind of years-long arc of destiny. And even coming to Stripe is something that kind of feels predestined for a long time, because I think a lot of kids, when I was hanging out with folks that were into computers, would spend their time learning to program to build computer games. Well, I learned to program because my parents had a small business they ran from home. They bought a computer. I didn't really know what to do with it. And I remember my dad said to me, could you make the computer do our invoices? And back then they used to type out their invoices on a typewriter, and they would write down the amounts by hand on a piece of paper. I remember every 3 months or so, they would have to sit up burning the midnight oil to do their tax return, where they would manually transcribe all the numbers and kind of send them off to their accountant. And so when I built that invoicing system, it was not particularly exciting or particularly fancy, but it kind of changed our family life. Like, they could press a button and the tax return would pop out, and we didn't have them being grumpy for a week every quarter while they were staying up late writing their tax returns. So economic infrastructure for businesses is something I've been very passionate about since getting into computing. So that culmination of like caring about people and making engineering productive, and then doing this at Stripe, where I could kind of do what got me the bug in the first place at huge scale for millions of businesses, it has been definitely the culmination of like 2 long journeys.
Wow, that's so awesome. Thank you so much. Rija, what about you?
Yeah, I think kind of similar to what everybody else here has mentioned. And as you mentioned at the beginning, like CTO for many different people can mean different things. I've never, like growing up, or even when I first got into software engineering, really thought about like, hey, I'm trying to chase like that particular title. My incentive and motivation for working has always been like work with a good set of people and focusing on what's the opportunity and how can I have like the best business impact. So when I started, obviously I started off as an individual contributor building systems, and I never actually thought about it, but I realized in the startup that I was at, I was actually taking care of this larger area. And I was doing kind of like engineering leadership, and then ultimately like, actually started managing the people. I never even used to have a product counterpart, and I realized I was actually doing that work. And then the CTO title came more so like much later. And the first gig was I got stupider over time, and potentially for like my more so my personal reasons, wanting a different cultural experience. I decided to move from Silicon Valley to London, which there were many people, and still in America, they're like, why would you do that? And even if you're not in Bay Area, like, New York is still better, yada, yada, yada. And when I started talking to people here about different opportunities, what surprised me is based on the different VCs or the entrepreneurs I was talking to, the roles that were popping up were CTO. So I'm like, oh, okay. But what does this actually entail? And I realized I'd actually kind of been already doing that. And it was more so kind of like a title change, so to speak, but the role and the day-to-day stuff wasn't necessarily that different from what I was doing before. But yeah, that's kind of how I found myself in this particular title, so to speak.
Awesome. Parag.
Similar to a lot of what others experience other than David, for me, it was not planned. It was not like a culmination of a journey that was planned in any way. It does feel right now, like perfect right now for where I am, like a company whose mission I really believe in, our purpose to serve the public conversation, and to get to do very technical work with the smartest minds. So in some sense, I share that with David. I find like this is like the job, like that definitely have designed for me in some shape, but I never planned anything. Through my 9 years at the company, I was always focused primarily on having the biggest impact on our customers. Like, our company has a huge focus on thinking about our customers and thinking about impact in terms of how it manifests, how our work manifests for our customers. And that part isn't particularly unusual. What might be unusual about my journey is that I changed what I worked on quite frequently through this time. Each of these changes was motivated by me proactively identifying an opportunity for impact. Another common theme across these was that all of them required me to learn new skills, somewhat intentionally, to be able to have the impact I wanted to have. These skills range from like very technical skills, like, okay, I need to understand the depths of machine learning and then figure out how the difference between academic machine learning and production at scale machine learning that works is connected to business outcomes and then is set up in a way that you can constantly and iteratively both operate it and then improve it in a way that helps your customers week after week as you evolve the system. And some of these skills were like what we call non-technical leadership skills, which are around sort of motivating and aligning cross-functional groups of people or teams towards exploring singular hypotheses or going on singular missions together, right? Through this journey, I played various roles, I think just like Regia said. I was an individual contributor at times, I managed small teams at times, I played PM-like roles. I was the kind who was just trying to be in places where I would learn new things in uncomfortable and new situations. I often like to say that I did like a fairly long, protracted PhD with lots of stints in industrial research labs. And I don't know if I apply a lot of those skills day to day. I do think the skill I value the most from that time is this curiosity that I developed and this confidence that if someone's willing to make a bet on me to put me in a new uncomfortable area or location or skill, that I can create a learning plan, learn from people around me, learn on the job, and try my best to be effective, right? So the meta around how to learn, how to adapt to situations was, I think, the confidence I got from my PhD, more so than the specific deep technical skills I got. And I think that has been really valuable for me in this journey. Ultimately, being in the role is such a privilege, and it's, in some sense, you're like fortunate that others can bet on you when you might not think you're ready for the role, just like I think Mary was mentioning earlier. And I've been fortunate to be given to have an impact at the leadership level for a company I really, really believe in.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for sharing. So we talked a little bit, he hinted a little bit of sort of this like developing and growing skills that are non-technical. Mary, like you've worked at companies small, medium, and large. Like what are the differences between like CTO at a company size 30 versus the CTO of looking over a group of 300?
I think it's really interesting because you get essentially inflection points, and I've been doing some kind of interim CTO kind of consulting, like Jason, you and Rita both do as well. And I think the one advantage of doing that kind of work is you get to see lots of different companies at lots of different stages and start to spot the patterns more easily than if you're just inside the machine as it grows. And so I think there's things when you're a team of 10, CTO is tech lead, right? Or often primary individual contributor as well, and also fixing the servers and also responding to the pager. I think when you and everything, there's so much for free when you're a team of 10. Everybody knows what's going on. Everybody knows the plan. Everybody knows the focus. Everybody can work on every bit of the product if there's reasonably often anyway. I think when you get to 20 to somewhere between 20 and 50 engineers, there's enough people that people start to go, hey, how do I get promoted? How does that happen, right? They start to want a framework, to want to understand what to work on, and or they, in some negative way, sometimes they'll like notice other people getting opportunities or getting promoted and start to be like, why was that them and not me? And so you need a little bit more structure, a little bit more explanation. I think somewhere between 100 and 150, then the interfaces between teams matter a lot more, and clear focus communication. Like you can have 100 engineers all going in different directions, and the only thing that engineers produce more of than code in the absence of good information is conspiracy theories, right? So like if you want to know the most ridiculous reason for a decision, like don't tell anybody anything about it for 2 weeks and then take a like random gossipy engineer off the floor, and you will get a absolutely hilariously entertaining answer, but it will probably be quite far from the truth as well. And so I think that's essentially what I've noticed is I think CTO is always a like systems systems design style of role, but the layers of abstraction that you operate at are different when you've got 50 engineers or 500 or 5,000. I think you just start, you end up working more and more on the systems that encourage a good environment for great work to happen. And you're more and more choosing, being very choiceful about where to make investments and where to make improvements. But you kind of end up, when you've got thousands and thousands of engineers, I think you end up having to try figure out what the most important tweak to make is, but knowing that a tweak you make here is going to be a shockwave for somebody at the team level in some ways. And I think that's quite an interesting part of this kind of role, is figuring out which abstraction level you should be working at. And I think the context that you're inside matters a lot too. So when I had a team of 300 inside a 300,000 person organization, when I led the government digital service tech team, that was a very different thing than having a team of 250 inside Monzo when Monzo had just hit 1,500 people. The proportion you are of the total organization matters a lot as well, I think, and changes the role in some ways. But yeah, I think the ability to go from working on the system of systems to get hundreds of engineers pointed in the right direction, collaborating well with product, including their design in their squads and working in this multidisciplinary way. That's quite different to when you drop down to a team of 30 and you probably need to be in the on-call rota personally again, in a way that you might not have been previously. But I think the ability to zoom in and out, and what David mentioned about the feeling like the CTO or the head of engineering at Google still did know the detail or could get to grips with the detail really quickly. I think that's one of the most challenging things about this role, to still be able to jump in to an incident debrief and understand what's going on and then decide whether that's indicative of a systemic problem that you need to address or not.
Yes. And what you're talking about, moving into the designing of systems, was that something that came easily to you or naturally to you? I feel like for a lot of folks, we see ourselves as technologists, and at what point does it feel okay, or does it ever feel okay to sort of give up the keyboard?
I don't think it ever feels okay. My previous teams will tell you I often kind of mutter about don't get promoted, it's just fucking spreadsheets all the way down. Sorry, Ruth, I swore, I didn't mean to. But yeah, I think you can end up feeling very, very far from things. But I think there are different ways to keep in touch. I know leaders who they'll pick up non-critical stuff on a backlog to help and keep their eye in. And I'm more of the I always try to still be useful in incidents, even if I couldn't put my hands on the keyboard and fix it myself. I can at least help with the critical thinking, whatever. I'm a systems thinker by nature. I come from an AI background. The kind of performative effects of complex effects you get from simple rules is a thing that was always of interest to me. Is where the area my PhD would have been in had I been able to afford to do it at the time. And so I think I've always thought in this way. I think I ended up moving into management because people were so much harder than computers, and it was more of a challenge. And so I think I kind of went into that knowing it was a change I wanted. But I had also a fairly topsy-turvy career. So P&G outsourced. P&G did the so Procter & Gamble are the biggest consumer goods company in the world, and they did the biggest outsourcing deal in history the day I joined the company. And because I was from such a technical background, they put me in a business role first to try and broaden me out. And so I ended up being somebody who definitely any other day would have been outsourced with all the other really technical people. I ended up being the one left behind, and so I was the most technical person still wearing a P&G badge for quite a long time. And that was, so I ended up doing sort of product program, project management, that pivot to that work much earlier in my career than a lot of other people I know. And then going back to being more technical again, where I think a lot of people have a really solid kind of number of years, a number of roles in kind of hands-on engineering, then architecture and so on. And then eventually moved to management. I was already managing a team of, probably had 300 or 400 engineers, or sorry, 300 or 400 people, not engineers, but broader set of people when I was 27, and I'd been managing people since I was 22 or 23. So I think I started younger on some of those skill sets, but then didn't have the other experiences.
Wow. Parag and David, so the two of you stepped into your roles under different circumstances, and Mary sort of alluded to like growing up inside the machine. Parag, you joined Twitter engineering back in 2011 and got promoted internally. David, you were an external hire coming from Google. I'd love to hear about like what those first 100 days look like for each of you. Parag, let's start with you first.
As you mentioned, my role gradually evolved within the company, within Twitter. When I took on the CTO role, I was already the most senior engineering IC at the company. And it was as such I had a broad purview over the technology strategy of the company and an ability to make an impact on that. When I took on the role, I worked with the leadership team as I took it on to be clear on what the first big opportunity of impact would be. As I mentioned earlier, like I always like to think of new transitions and new roles in terms of how do I make an impact on the company, on our customers. And it's just over time, what evolves is the time horizon of that impact and the durability of that impact. So my first focus area as I took the role on was clear. And it was to sort of set up machine learning across the organization to be durable and to put us on the right path long term, to make all the right investments, to hire the right talent, to have the right strategy, and to build the organization in a way that could sort of transform us more towards the future. And honestly, like that part of the role, I was better set up for than a typical new CTO coming in, right? I had years of context on the people, on the technology, on the history, on what's been the missing ingredient or missing ingredients holding us back in the past. And that's really helpful when you try to have this sort of new mission, and it sort of set me up for an early win of sorts, right? Relative to an outsider coming in. But there's this sort of, we talk about like all the differences in CTO roles across the world, but I think there is like a common theme, which is sort of the core of the job, which is to be the technical voice on the leadership team of the company, right? And to make sure that every decision made is enriched by your presence as a CTO in that group, right? That we're not operating in silos, we're operating as a leadership team. Presumably, technology is a key part of the company's long-term success. And to make sure that as decisions far away from technical decisions are made, you're thinking through and enriching them through your presence. And that sort of was a thing that is completely new to me in this role. I had not been in that position or had that context. So there's a lot of intentional need for me to go around, learn, get context on the broader company, on the challenges, build mental models. Like I had mental models for how our technology worked. I had to build mental models for how our organization worked beyond just the technology organization. And I had to learn how to sort of show up as a productive value add to the leadership team, right? And so that was sort of the new component for me in the first sort of 100 days, where I had to sort of learn about the organization, learn new skills, figure out how I could contribute. And that's sort of what I found interesting about the first 100 days.
That's great. David. Nope, you're on mute.
My journey was kind of similar and quite different in that. So I joined Stripe as head of engineering and then became CTO later, without really the role changing, which was nice. Actually, it gave me a period to kind of really learn, and that's what the first 100 days were really about, just learning a lot. We have a really wonderful culture at Stripe, and in many ways it's similar to other companies I've worked at, and in other ways it's quite different. So we have a set of operating principles. The first of those is to be users first, and we really spend a lot of time talking to the businesses that build on Stripe and learning from them. So it was definitely important as I was ramping up in this role, not only to spend a lot of time talking to folks inside the team in order to build up those same mental models that Parag talks about, both how our technology works and also how the organization fits together. That really resonated when you said that, Parag. But also to understand what is it that our users are doing today and what do they want and need into the future. And a few things were quite useful there. I mean, literally just getting out and talking to folks was important. Also, actually using the product. So I guess, if you're working at a company like Twitter, using the product is something that comes fairly naturally because it's a consumer product and you can go ahead and use it. I've really deeply believed in making sure that you dog food the products that you're working on for years and years. And, if you work in an infrastructure space or in a business to business space, it can actually take quite a lot of work to get into the mental model where you can really use it, simulating a user. And I spent a lot of time really thinking about that. And that has been extremely valuable to me. And I really love talking to users. It's some of the most interesting conversations of the day. But then more broadly, it was important to get to know the people and the culture and understand which things are working really great and needed to stay, and which things as we scaled might actually limit our growth and be things that I'd need to spend time and attention on. And in orienting there's a book that I found really valuable, which is called The First 90 Days. It's something that was recommended to me by a manager I had years before, and I picked it up again. It was on my bookshelf, and I pulled it off the shelf. I was like, this is the moment for this one. And it's actually a good book. There's a lot of detail, but really, it kind of says, seek first to understand. So listen hard first before you jump in and start, acting like you know what's going on. But also that it's important to actually help the team through something critical in the first 90 days so they understand this is a person who's going to be a doer, not a talker. And I really did approach the first period through that lens. And then a lot of what Parag said, direct parallels for me as well, it was really important, really valuable to build strong connections to the rest of the leadership team of the company, who are all wonderful people, and make sure that the perspective of the engineering and technology org was kind of well represented there. And that was something I definitely prioritized early on. It's remarkable how similar it was, even though the journey was quite different, I think.
Great. Rija, so Parag and David both sort of talked about being a part of a leadership team. And I think for all of us, when we start out as managers initially, it's like we are rage against the machine. We are protecting against the dark forces out there. And there's a point where we realize, oh no, like we are the machine. And it's our job to help things move along. But being part of the leadership team and not being part of the silo means like having stakeholders and balancing the stakeholder needs with your team's needs. What are some of your thoughts on sort of how that balance works? What do you found works well for you? What are some interesting things in that space?
Yeah, I think for me, what really at least crystallized it for me internally, and then the learning that I go with people that I'm actually working with and the type of culture that I then want to be attached to, is with the high level understanding that we're all in this as a team together. And by that, it's not like, oh, this is engineering, this is product, this is ops, this is finance, this is CS, or whatever, design, and whatever other functions there might be, depending on which your company actually is. And there's some like high level company goal. So like maybe if you're at the CTO level, you're kind of like caring about that high level company goal. Depending on which layer you're actually at, maybe you're like a senior like tech lead or something, or just an engineering manager, or whatever layer it may go up to, you care about whatever that particular business area domain is and what is that high level company goal. Many companies are now very much metrics driven, so that may be defined by whatever that high level key metric for you is. And then for me, it's that understanding that yes, I may be there from engineering or whatever other area, but that's what makes it unique for me is that particular technical skill set, just as it makes it unique with regards to this ops and finance person or this other product person that I'm working with. And the fact that we actually have differing skill set as well as, different ways of thinking about it is ultimately what actually helps make it unique. Now, obviously, like these kind of sometimes sound like, much better on paper versus sometimes when it can sometimes seem a little bit more quote unquote passionate discussion, so to speak. But I think, again, trying to like loop it back to that high level like goal point is extremely important. The other thing for me particularly is even when we were first talking about like, how did you find yourself to be a CTO or whatever, for me, and the reason why I've really enjoyed being in startups is I basically just want to be a business leader. I didn't even want to be an engineer early on. I'm not one of those people that actually particularly, which sounds bad, like really cares about technology so much. For me, it's about the people and ultimately like what's the solution I'm delivering. And to me, an engineer is kind of like taking the analogy of a beaver in the animal kingdom. Like you're there to provide good for the society. And so when I'm thinking about all of these things with regards to a particular problem, it's about making sure that we're just kind of all in it together with a different skill set. For something like engineering and product, for me, those are the closest relationship of any other unit together, and to me, almost one team. Obviously, we want everybody to be thinking about like the end client. We want everybody to be metrics and data driven. But I think of engineering as a little bit more like the left brain and product to be more on the right side of the brain. There are certainly challenging situations that sometimes I've had to face, not so much with product, but because I've worked in fintech and depending on, which I think some of the folks have kind of talked about with regards to culture, is sometimes depending on the company you're working at and if it's a tech first company or if it's a tech enabled company and where exactly tech kind of fits in there, then with regards to some of the other functions and their past experiences. So particularly in the past when I've had to work in companies where tech is not necessarily that much at the forefront, or it is at the forefront, but now you've hired people on compliance or finance and ops, and they're used to a different model of working. Like they're almost used to IT and they don't understand like, oh, software engineering and product and all these different functions, then it's trying to make sure you're able to understand their mental model as well. So similar to what Parag and even David were talking about with regards to actually just listening to people and which background they're coming from and why they feel a certain way. Like for me, in one of the instances when I was working with somebody from the finance and ops side, and they wanted this kind of like dual authentication system, which like for this one small feature just like didn't necessarily kind of like make sense. But listening more to them, like they're like, hey, it's my license that's actually on the line. And if something goes wrong, then I will never be able to practice, like not just in this company, but ever. So like really just trying to understand where people are coming from and then tying that back together with the high level company goal is something that's worked for me.
Awesome. That's great. I feel like some of those conversations are like sometimes really difficult to have in terms of like trying to represent a unified perspective when your teams are looking for someone to be in their corner. We're trying to get some questions through the Q&A. One of these is sort of around, tech-focused orgs are coming under increasing criticism about the unintended consequences of technology. Like, what does technology leadership look like in this context? Parag, you've been in the seat for about 3 years now at Twitter. How have you seen your role changed over that time in this context?
As I was speaking about earlier, the role evolves constantly because the company or the business encounters different challenges over time. So I've had differing areas of focus. I mentioned ML earlier. Since then, I've focused a lot on scaling and operating our platform at scale, improving sort of the velocity of development and the developer experience at the company, similar to how David was mentioning earlier. And also grappling with sort of the impact of our platform on the world and figuring out how to create a culture that is one that's focused on learning from experts, no matter where they might be, understanding that we're solving real world problems with real world ramifications, and it's not about the technology, and technology alone isn't the solution, that it requires expertise in all kinds of disciplines and a mindset around being able to look at yourself, your service, the products you're building critically to understand how they need to evolve and improve as the world around us evolves. So that is certainly an aspect that you have to understand the context and evolve your culture in a way that prepares it to sort of, as I think Vijay mentioned, like do good in the world ultimately, right? And I think that is the only durable path for an organization to succeed. And I think creating a culture that can facilitate that is really important. Now, you asked about like the change over time. My role has evolved in various different ways. One way to think about it is I've had at times zero reports, and at times I've led large organizations that reported to me. Those are two very different contexts where you operate very differently, although your goals are the same. As sort of my life pre-CTO, life as a CTO has been one of like constant learning and constantly seeking out new impact, figuring out what I need to learn to be in a place where I can do that. But there are also constraints. I mentioned one earlier, which is to be a productive member of the leadership team. There are others to constantly focus on hiring and building the right culture in context of the world and your service. You have to focus on the long-term technical strategy and how you communicate it to align large numbers of people to work together. And ultimately, you have to prioritize the customer over any team or an individual, right? And you have to figure out how that happens organizationally. Through these sort of one of the principles that sort of dear to me and like it's the operating principle, as I would say, for me personally, is the role of a CTO at sort of the scale of the company we are at is fundamentally about empowering the experts closest to the details of the work, right? With the richest possible context, and then having them have the autonomy to make decisions and operate independently, right? And to know what are the set of experts required for a certain context, right? Like it's not always just engineers, it's extremely cross-functional teams. You have to think about policy and social scientists and engineers and product managers and designers and like so many other disciplines we're not even talking about. For people to bring all of those lenses and as a group have the autonomy, right? Like all of us leaders will readily admit that like all the people in our companies are experts at things that we know very little about, right? And it's on us to basically empower them to solve customer problems and create that context, right? So that's ultimately how, in my view, is the recipe for success for a technology organization. And I have ways to go in terms of being able to do that successfully at scale. Constantly find ourselves failing on that. And you have to constantly do the work to improve on that.
That's so great. Thank you so much. Mary, you might have some thoughts on this.
I firstly agree with what's been said, and I think Rija put it very well earlier that we have to be business leaders as well as technology leaders. We can't just care about this one part. The only thing I would add is I think we can do a lot by being really deliberate about what our organizations look like. I think many of the worst examples of products making it out into the world and having terrible consequences could have been averted if there was a more representative like of the world team working on it. And so it's I remember being a judge at a hack day where a group were literally like very excitedly showing the thing where they'd used the Foursquare API to find, they literally called it Girls Near You. They built a stalker app at a hack day weekend and thought that they were going to win first prize with it, right? And predictably, there were no women in their team. And that's the other thing that we can do. So I agree with what you said, but I think also one of the most important things we can do is be really good role models of including the right people in the room, whether that's the social scientists, whether it's making sure that product and tech does act as a unit, like everybody's described. We should be absolutely partners in crime, and that's the right way to work. But then the other thing we can do is try to make sure that there's the right variety of voices and the right representation to avoid these kind of massive missteps, which I think are the ones that are, they're company threatening. And so, if on all of our risk registers, if we allow those to exist, which we probably should, they're not a bad thing in themselves, right? Should be like, we enable something so terrible to happen that it destroys the reputation of the company. Like, that is legit. That's a risk for every one of our companies, and actively managing that risk the same way we manage the risk of data centers being down, or over reliance on a particular vendor that's in trouble. Like, we should also be thinking about those kind of things. And you're right, they're softer solutions. It's culture and hiring and how you reward people and all of these things. But those are also systemic tweaks that we can make and invest in.
Great. David, so, we all are sitting here and it sounds like we know what we're doing. And Parag mentioned, sometimes we fail. I'd love to hear about, like, what are the hard parts of the job? Like, what's the part of the CTO role that, like, you have struggled the most, and how have you sort of navigated your way through it?
Yeah, great question. I think the hardest element of my role, compared to that kind of platonic ideal that I thought I saw years ago in someone who just seemed to have it all together and was doing an amazing job of this, is it all comes at you all at the same time. So, on any given day of the week, I probably like wake up and sit down at my desk and have intention of working on like a particular thing that's, maybe some, fairly grandiose long-term thing. And then, there are many urgent and important, because, most of these are related to like helping a customer or helping a person in the org who's, got some particular burning problem going on, that are also kind of competing for your time and attention. So I've literally found figuring out how to manage and meter my own time and attention across those things one of the greatest challenges. And the principal technique that I use, I don't think I've got it figured out by any means, is at the very beginning of the week, I try to, before I open my email, before I look at anyone, pings coming in on Slack or whatever, I try to write down what it is that's most important from my perspective to get done in that particular week. And then that is the document that I come back to between tasks, not my inbox. And that, I think, helps me stay focused on actually making the impact for our team and our users that I kind of, that it's that impact that makes me feel fulfilled in the role. If I have a week where I don't get that done, but I'm still very busy through the whole week, I'm still going to like Friday afternoon be like, well, could have been better. So that has been particularly hard. I wonder if others have tips for that.
Richard, what are your thoughts
on the hardest part of the job?
Yeah.
I think David's right with regards to kind of like the time and prioritization, particularly during these times. I think another one that I've personally kind of felt like, obviously, like, we've been talking about some of the challenges, but I personally feel like there's a situation when you feel like you're actually set up for success, and the culture and the people surrounding you, as well as the like whoever your manager is, that maybe the CEO or exactly where you fit into the role, you have their trust and autonomy and their backing. Now, you may disagree with them on certain things, but you have a good base understanding with them. However, sometimes that may not necessarily always be the case. And clearly there's other deep-rooted causes there that need to be looked at with regards to the relationship as well as with the culture. But personally, when I've been in those situations, which have unfortunately happened, then what I found challenging is, particularly in a leadership role, like obviously there's things that I care about myself and I want to be executing on, but I feel like I have this greater onus for my team, so to speak. I think Parag was kind of talking about it with regards to like, however the CTO role may differ, you're ultimately kind of like that voice. So kind of similar to that, for me, it's like you're that representation for that particular org. Now I'm going to hold them accountable within that particular group and like, make sure they're doing a good job and everything. But it's also then my job to be able to kind of well represent them and kind of be their advocate, so to speak. So what I found challenging is when I feel like either I or that org or team is not necessarily set up for success or I don't necessarily like backing for my support system.
Nice. We're getting a question that sort of dovetails with another question I was thinking about asking. So the question is, how do you know if you're doing great work as a CTO? Like something that I've found in my career as you quote unquote, move up the ladder is that the job description gets more and more vague, right? I mean, I don't think there's any career ladder out there that describes the CTO level. And there's no one there telling you how to do your job. So Parag, I was interested from sort of your perspective, like how did you come to define your role and how do you know that you're doing it well?
I think you said something interesting that nobody tells you how to do your job, but actually my experience is kind of everyone does. So, and I think that's one of the wonderful things about our culture at Twitter, that I receive feedback from my peers about how I'm doing personally. I receive feedback from people in the organization about how I'm showing up as an individual. And it's phrased in a way that I can take back and improve myself. I also get feedback on our strategy from my peers and from individuals across the company if I have office hours. Like, people see problems that we have internally that are keeping us from meeting our customer needs. And we have a culture where they're able to share them with me directly. And it's something I really value because I wouldn't know how to do my job, but I have the help of all of these people who are constantly telling me and helping me do my job. In terms of how you know if you're doing a good job, and I think that's a really hard question that I often grapple with, right? Like ultimately, when you're on a leadership team, what matters is outcomes for your customers. It doesn't actually matter if I'm good at my job, if we fail our customer needs and if we fail our customers or our company, right? So in some sense, it is about collective. It's like a team sport rather than an individual sport, right? Like there are no CTO metrics. Is the company doing the right thing for the customers and the world? So that's ultimately about the outcomes. As I said earlier, if I'm doing a good job, teams are empowered to be their most creative, to bring their full selves to work, to be inclusive in nature, and to be autonomous, to understand customer needs to the point that David was making earlier, and to have the right diversity of viewpoints and skills within those teams to be able to go meet those challenges, right? So that's the leading indicator of success. When you find those teams, you're like, okay, I'm doing something right. And when you find teams which are not set up that way, that's work for me to do, right? That's the leading indicator. But ultimately, the outcomes are the only things that really matter when you're in such a senior role.
Awesome. We have another question coming in. Companies with scaling issues usually want to hire a super CTO, someone with all the attributes. How can less experienced, less high potential candidates deal with this? Rijay, you're doing a lot of advisory work right now. I imagine you're seeing some patterns out there. You have a survey of what's going on in the space out there. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
With regards to some of the challenges that are going on. Yeah, I think there's certain challenges that I think are kind of like agnostic of the current times we're in. I think some of those things have already been mentioned by the folks here. One of the ones that I have always found challenging, regardless of whatever my role title has been or what geography I've actually been in, is with being able to hire good people. And I think being able to kind of hire good engineers at whatever level is always hard. But I think being able to hire good managers and leader is always a challenge, no matter at least any of the organizations that I've either been associated with or any friends, family, colleagues, ex-colleagues that I've ever talked to in either Bay Area, New York, Toronto, Seattle, or across Europe. The one that I think is particular to these times is, as we're doing right now, we're in a video conference. I imagine if we were actually meeting in person and talking to each other, then potentially how we would have even interacted with each other and how the relationship would have formed would have been much different. We're like, right now we're like a little bit more hesitant and who's going to be speaking when and exactly. And what I'm seeing right now is the challenge with everybody in lockdown. It's harder to create those relationships, particularly as new people are starting within the different roles. Obviously, I think when you first start off in any particular, like early on in your career, technology is the harder part. My personal opinion is people are the most hardest thing to kind of they're most frustrating, they're most painful, but they're also the most fun and interesting as well too. And even with all this AI and everything, you'll do it more on the automation side, but I think having figured it out on the human side will always be hard for you. And so it's trying to accrue that social capital first within that, creating those bonds and relationship. And then when you take it at a higher level with regards to what we were talking about, alignment with the different cross-functional teams and looking at the high-level business goals, then I think it becomes much more difficult. Along with that, I think is paired up with the need that it's obviously a very challenging time for everybody, both mentally, physically, as well as with regards to their personal life. Sometimes I think there is obviously, and as there should be, attention paid to people that are either in relationships and have kids and taking care of them. But I think at the same time, you might have somebody who's just living alone by themselves. And how are they actually dealing with this? Because for a lot of people, just going to work and interacting with people was an important part of their job. So I think another challenge that is there then for leaders like CTO or whoever is then trying to make sure that people are still being productive and getting some personal satisfaction out of work, but also you're not necessarily pushing them too hard, because there might be aspects that they might be sharing with you or other people in your company and work, but there are certain aspects that they might not necessarily be comfortable sharing with you. So how do you kind of provide that supportive environment for them without necessarily kind of knowing all the details?
Awesome. We are running short on time. I want us to do one quick around the horn questions. David, we'll start with you. What is a skill that you either acquired or leveled up on that has been particularly important or useful in your CTO life?
Definitely hiring, and leadership hiring in particular. So we're obviously a fast-growing organization, and one of the things I focus on a lot is how can we help people develop inside the company, but also at this kind of rate of growth, it's important to bring great expertise in from outside, and finding leaders who are, a really strong fit for the culture and helping people, but also who really, have clear visions and are opinionated about the space they're working in so they can help propel everything forward, has been really critical in helping the team. And so getting good at scouring the world for the absolute best talent and then helping them understand why this is going to be the most amazing place to make an impact, which it is, has definitely been a skill that has been important and that I had to learn a lot. There really is a lot of time and energy that you need to put in to really help folks who are probably doing something wonderful right now. I understand that, there's opportunity for tremendous impact.
Awesome. Mary, what about you?
Translating. So the ability to kind of make complex technical stuff make sense to folks who have less of a technical background, but also helping the business side or the science side with whatever your situation is. The finance or regulatory side makes sense to the technical folks. So helping translate between domains has been super, super helpful. And then I think the other most useful skill I learned along the way was, I think as technologists, we tend to have a very logic-based approach to convincing people and trying to influence people. And so the most useful internal training course I ever went on at P&G was one where there are 4 different influencing styles, and the logic one only works on people who are also default logic, and here are the other 3, which when I started out working on marketing and sales systems at P&G, and it was like landing on a different planet in terms of how you persuaded people to kind of, or influence people to back a play or whatever. So I think those are probably my most useful that I've learned along the way. Systems thinking always helps though.
Parag.
I would say the skill has been sort of evolving communication to be able to operate at scale, whether it be for technical audiences or for the broader audience, as Mary was mentioning, and how you sort of are able to align people's repeat messages and create clarity for the organization so that folks are empowered. Uh, and the hardest challenge I struggle with and continuously have to work on is finding this right balance of being opinionated as a technology organization, to be able to take experts from a certain area and have their sort of technical judgment and opinion be the company strategy, and to have that sort of top-down alignment while having empowerment and freedom for people to exercise good judgment when appropriate, right? So the right balance of uh, empowerment for people across the company, but being able to align the large organization on technology strategy through crisp and clear communication has been sort of the key area for me. That's been really valuable.
So, Rija, take us home.
Sure. So I think there's, particularly for me, I think there's certain skill sets that I'm always looking to improve both in my personal and professional life. What I think has been relevant for me as a quote unquote CTO or as a tech leader has been compartmentalization, like both with regards to personal and professional life, or even the things that I'm dealing with at work as well too, because, you know, shit's going to hit the fan. Certain things are not necessarily going to go your way or how you had even predicted or gone through, but being able to like really deal with that, and then how you then represent yourself to the larger team, because you are not just about how you're dealing with it. And you may think you have not been saying those words, but your facial expressions or your body language can be very much picked by other people in the team. The second one is negotiation. Like negotiation just generally, like with regard to like, obviously, like, you know, when people think of it as like, oh, there's salary compensation negotiating, but just generally like alignment and talking to other people, which I think goes into one of the things that Parag was talking about with regards to communication. I think those have been the two key factors for me personally.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. That is all the time we have today. I want to thank Mary, Parag, David, Rija for their time and their wonderful insights. Thank you all out there in the world for joining us today, and for the LeadDev organizers for putting this all together. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you, Jason, for hosting us.